Good morning to our YouTube audience, good morning to our in-person audience, and good morning to those of you on live stream. Reverend Jack Abel, Senior Director of Spiritual Care here on Magic Mountain Caron Treatment Centers, wearing a mask because of heightened COVID prudence on campus. So I apologize for the scratchiness and the breath sounds, but we're trying to do our very best to keep our community safe and our doors wide open. And today is the 5th of December, 2021. It's both the 7th of the 8 days of the Hanukkah observance in 2021, and it is the 2nd of the 4 Sundays of Advent in the Christian calendar that marches its way 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown to the celebration of the Nativity, the birth of the Christ child. So those are important dates in 2 of the spiritual calendars that intersect with the lives of a good number of our patients who identify themselves as part of wisdom traditions. When I have the privilege of weekly preparing for messages, I sometimes pay more or less attention to either readings or calendar, but I was moved by the 2 instances of the calendar, the second Sunday of Advent and the Hanukkah thing, because it felt to me like it was speaking to me in a way, and so I'm going to dig a little deeper than I maybe usually do with that. So one of the things you're going to hear later is a passage of Scripture that's one of my favorite little passages of Scripture. It finishes with a little poem that you sometimes see on cards, and people make Hallmark moments out of it. Let me see if I can paraphrase it or quote it fairly closely to exactly. By the tender mercies of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us, bringing light to those in darkness and in the shadow of death, and guiding our feet in paths of peace. Sounds amazingly hopeful, doesn't it? I just love that passage. It's a passage in the first chapter of the Gospel of Luke, and it's uttered on the lips of a fellow named Zechariah. And I think the truth is many of us, even reared in these traditions, don't know these stories very well, but some of you probably do know and some of you don't. So Zechariah is the husband of Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is the cousin of Mary, mother of Jesus. So this is all the way this narrative builds suspense in the telling of the birth of the baby Jesus, with quite an extraordinary emphasis on it as a historical event, unique in all history. And so Zechariah has a little place in it, and he is Jesus's uncle, right? And so Uncle Zechariah. And Zechariah is told at a moment of observance of a sort of candle lighting thing, it's funny, this comes up on Hanukkah, by an angel, that he and his wife are going to bear a child who is John the Baptist, and that John the Baptist will prepare the way for the coming Messiah. And those of us who read the story could understand, like, Zechariah is a bit skeptical. He questions whether he and his wife could yet have a baby given their age, and just sounds unlikely to him. So these stories are funny, and I don't know how to explain rebuke from the divine, but anyway, gets his knuckles rapped by God for being skeptical about the promise that he's been told that his wife Elizabeth will bear this child. And so his tongue is struck silent. And so he spends 9 months, or the remainder of her 9 months, in an inability to speak. And it's only at his bris, his circumcision, the child's circumcision, that somebody asks him as the dad what the child's name is, and Zechariah writes on a piece of paper, the boy's name is John, because that's what he was told. And at that moment, he's given voice again, and he says this thing. Blessed be the God of Israel is the beginning of the passage, and the close of the passage is what I quoted you. That by the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us, bringing light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, and guiding our feet in the path of peace. So I don't know if Zechariah was a poet beforehand, but he's had 8 months to script in his head, and so he says something that here I am, 20 centuries later, repeating, and it's this promise of hope coming out of a miserable period. The other event that presents itself to us on this Sunday morning is the Hanukkah story. And there are many, many years as a Catholic kid and then as a Protestant and also as an atheist, I didn't really learn the Hanukkah story, but now as a clinical chaplain, I have been really blessed by the opportunity to learn stories of different traditions. And and especially many of the Caron patients have made me much more informed about Judaism than I ever thought I would be. And I've come to really love and respect the Jewish tradition and understand that it is part of my own tradition in a way that I never really completely got before. So Hanukkah, you know, and one of the people that I love who's a Jewish person in my life says, the only reason people make such a big deal out of Hanukkah is because it competes with Christmas. The truth is, if you're deeply Jewish, Hanukkah is a minor thing. So that is sort of true. The big holidays for Judaism are the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Passover. So those are the biggies if you really want to study Jewish holiday observance. But Hanukkah, coming in at this period of time of the year, generally somewhat close to Christmas, often does in this northwestern part of civilization get a certain amount of focus. And it relates to a period in time in history when the Jewish people had been evicted from Jerusalem and from the temple at Jerusalem, which was the centerpiece of their faith and worship, and were fighting to come back in. And the city of Jerusalem was under Greek and Syrian occupation. This is 2,200 years ago, 167 before the Common Era, a couple of 150 plus years before the birth of Jesus. And there's an observance of 8 days of candle lighting, which is apparently part of the regular Jewish practice. But when the Maccabean Jews find their way back into Jerusalem and take back over the temple and want to practice their 8 days of candle lighting, and they get in there, there's only one flask of oil that is not contaminated by foreign dilution, and it's enough candle lighting for one day. And the miracle of Hanukkah is that this one reserve of oil that was still left in the temple burns for 8 solid nights. And that's why, so we have this menorah over here, and later when we do the readings, we'll light the 8th candle, which would be lit tonight at sunset, and the Hanukkah observance ends tomorrow evening at sunset. I'm not sure, I think this is the first year of all of my years of sobriety when I thought, oh, it's kind of a fun recovery sacred story because it's a one day at a time story, right? Like on the second day, the candle stays lit. They're like, oh, well, it won't stay lit on the third day. And then on the third day, it stays lit. Oh, like, oh, and that was like you and me. I'm like, Jack didn't have a drink for 2 days, but there's no way he's not going to get drunk tomorrow, you know. And then the third day, and here we are. This is where these two stories land. The story of Zechariah and his imprisoned tongue suddenly freed, and the story of this people who had been restricted from the celebration of their faith, suddenly able to celebrate it and indeed finding it bountifully supplied. lands on the red chairs in the Chit Chat Auditorium in Warnersville, Pennsylvania, a room where people come to flee captivity to alcohol, drugs, relationships, and behaviors of addictive nature. So, were you captive in the Maccabean sense? No, but yes, right? And have you been being punished or rebuked or suffered from poor choices and like regrettable behavior? That's a better way of saying it. Yes, so I think we can identify with Zechariah in a certain sense. I don't know how many of you feel like you're banished from your family, or that you that stuff happens all the time in families. And this is a moment always. The Caron Chapel service is this pivot place where Christmas, Easter, Hanukkah, Yom Kippur, Passover, all of these wisdom traditions, sacred festivals preach really well, because what happens here on a routine basis is this profound turn from captivity to freedom, from death to life, from sickness to wellness, from isolation to community, from what looks to the outside world like stupidity to reasonable participation in the productive life of a society. We go from being outcast to being maybe welcome back home again. And that happens here all the time. Then on top of all of that, what I'm given as a way of like this confluence of themes and streams of things to think about is my topic calendar, which puts the word valor in front of us. I mentioned that before we turned on the recording. Valor is a word that entered my calendar a couple of years ago of topics, and I've really enjoyed speaking about it because there's a thing to say about it that relates to me in my young life. In my young life, I thought that valor was sort of the same as courage, that it was daring. But I am an old man. And I look back on some of the things that I did that I thought were courageous, that were just stupid. And I think back on some of the things I did. Like, to me, courage was doing liquid LSD at Red Rocks in the 1970s to see the Grateful Dead. I thought that was my war story. And I wanted you to be impressed by that, and now I'm embarrassed by it. And what I've realized is that the choices and behavior that I most wish to live into, and the ones that I admire in you and others, are decisions for recovery, and decisions for love, and decisions that are hard decisions that we make, but that are for noble purpose, right? And I'm not trying to be overly scary or manipulative, but I am. I'm trying to be scary and manipulative, I'll admit it. I struggle with the gravitas of these moments when I have the chance to stand in front of you, because I have watched people leave here and die. And I have also watched people leave here and get well. And I know you are on a knife edge. Either one of those outcomes is absolutely on the table. And it's impossible for me to forget that many of those we lose, and when we reflect on their death from suicide or overdose, or the tragic dissolution of their circumstances, their broken marriages, or their exile from their kids or whatever, to think back on the choices they made and second guess a bunch of those choices. And I'm sorry to tell you, but a bunch of times it's because people don't make the courageous moves to support their recovery. People didn't go to sober living. People didn't get more care. People didn't get the trauma work that they didn't. People didn't. And it's really hard in hindsight to look at that and go, gosh, darn it. So this is a moment, not different than last week or than next week. Every Sunday here is such a moment, but the calendars of the wisdom traditions that are central to many of us line up today to bring a note of urgency as days are shortening and spring seems far off. There is an opportunity for you in the shadow of death and living in darkness to hear a word from me and from the text and from Caron and from the recovery community that says there is life ahead. There are possible futures that you don't even know what to hope for or imagine. This is one of the really important things about recovery's promises, is that recovery is, one of its signature lines is life beyond our wildest dreams. I thought that meant a bigger car than I could think of. I thought that meant a more attractive woman than the one I was dreaming of. I thought that meant more zeros in my checkbook. I thought, in other words, I didn't realize it meant dreams that I didn't even know to put on my dream board. Because if anybody had told me 35 years ago that I would end up wearing a stole on Sunday mornings and preaching to a community, I would have laughed in their face. And today, I love that I have the chance to be what I am here with you. It is such a fit and fulfillment of my weird story. And that would be my gentle urging to you, is to understand that you have an opportunity to experience grace, mercy, healing, freedom, forgiveness, renewal. Oh, it sounds so high and mighty. I'm telling you, it's real. And it is absolutely right on the plate being slid in front of you. And as a member of many treatment teams on this mountain, I can tell you that's what we're dreaming for. We're dreaming for you to have a life beyond your wildest dreams. We want you to be and stay and sustain your recovery. I just got to see somebody today who's back for a tune-up, and I love that thought. Like, if you have been sober and then you return to use and now you're back here, don't beat yourself up with the, oh my God, chain stick. Pick up and move on. Live into tomorrow. Like, this is the day that the tender mercy of God breaks upon us like the dawn, falls on you in whatever darkness you are in, illuminating a path forward. And my prayer is that you would have the courage to take the valorous road, to do the hard thing, to say yes to what you don't want to say yes to commit to more care, to love your loved ones enough to keep yourself away from them for longer. Give them future Christmases at the expense of this one.